Did you know that the real story of Lorax was inspired by a diary full of nothing but tragedies? This movie came out in 2012, but the original inspiration was only found recently. And that's because big companies hid it from the public for a terrible reason. They wanted us to believe that the real Lorax is called Truax, but only a few people know his true origin. And I'm not talking about the original book, but about what inspired the creation of the book. Welcome to another episode of La Triste Historia Detrás. For those who love The Cat in the Hat or The Grinch, you'll know that the original creator of Lorax is Dr. Seuss. From there, Illumination used that inspiration to make the movie and turn it into a hit in its day. But whether you've seen this movie or not, get ready to learn a lot of things you wouldn't imagine about this story. To understand the true origin of Lorax, we have to understand the messages of its last two adaptations, the movie and the book. Both have the same message, but with several interesting points that were changed. For example, the Once-ler. In the book, the Once-ler is the only villain that appears in the story. There is no Mr. O'Hare. He is a boy rejected by his own family who only seeks success. In the book, we only have an ambitious villain whose face is never revealed. On the other hand, you could say that Lorax is the one chosen by nature, who is responsible for taking care of his entire environment. He knows who is in need and can even feel the pain of a tree when it falls. He is the one who tries to convince Once-ler to think twice about his actions so that he doesn't destroy the entire Trufula forest.
Satisfied? Did you fill the void inside you? Or do you need more?
In the end, all this effort was in vain. The species that lived in this forest became extinct. The Barbalatoso bears that ate trufulas, birds and humes, swans, fish, all became extinct until only the poor and lonely Lorax was left. Wow, that's a really intense story if you think about it. But Illumination made it less intense for audiences, just like Dr. Seuss did with the original story so he could publish his book for children. But then, what is the real inspiration behind Lorax? What did Dr. Seuss see that was only recently discovered? Let's find out. In 2021, several pages of a diary were found under some rocks where day by day, it describes how a company called Once-ler, or the Once-ler, they were responsible for cutting down an entire forest. All these pages are filled with scenes that are intense for many, but I'm going to read you a few excerpts from these pages in this video. So, if you're a sensitive person and cry easily, get your tissues ready. First day, today I was called out of my burrow. When I heard the cry of a truffula tree, I confronted the young man who was cutting the tree. He told me he was going to make a multi-purpose dress with its tufts and that everything would be fine. Day 7. Dozens of people arrived and started cutting down the trees. I can't believe how fast they are. At first, the Barbaloots and I hugged the trees. They didn't care and kept cutting them down. There are so many trufulas that the workers just went to cut down others. Day 11. The screams of the trees are unbearable. We have to stop them now. Day 12. They killed Barbara, one of the Barbaloots. She was messing with the engine of a machine when a security guard shot her. He once took Barbara's body so we couldn't bury her. We will always remember your sacrifice, Barbara. The diary goes on for many days and ends with a list of 578 names, which are possibly those who died in all this deforestation. It is also mentioned that truffula seeds take 10 years to start growing. 10 years to become a tree, and another 10 years before they start bearing fruit. Just like what happens in Dr. Seuss's book. This also tells us that trees had completely disappeared from nature, making it impossible to prove that this diary is authentic. But it is believed that Dr. Seuss had access to this material to get inspired and create his own book, which later became this movie. But is it thought that all this happened when Dr. Seuss visited Africa for a few days? right in the very same location where not long ago, several scientists discovered that there may be some evidence of what inspired the design of the character Lorax. And wow, it really is a very curious fact. But before we find out which animal inspired the Lorax, leave us a comment if you're enjoying the video, and please share it if you care about caring for the environment and preserving it. Dr. Seuss was a naturalist and environmentalist who loved to study nature as well as preserve life and discover new species. He and his wife went to visit a wildlife reserve in Kenya, Africa, the same year the Lorax was written, but just before it was published. During their visit, they encountered a species called the patas monkey, and that's not a bad joke about legs. This monkey is very different from other monkey species. With the fur on their faces, they grow a kind of mustache. And they are also known as the orange monkey or the red monkey. Something very similar to a character we've already talked about. Dr. Seuss was heavily inspired by this animal for the creation of the Lorax, since they have many things in common. The most curious of these coincidences is that the patas monkey depends a lot on a tree called Acacia drepanolobium, or whistling acacia, which produces small wine-colored fruits, very similar to those eaten by the barbaloots. Before the Once-ler wiped out all the truffula trees. And this makes a lot of sense, since in all the stories, whether in the diary, the book, or the movie, the Lorax defends the trees, which means that the Lorax is not a magical being who protects the forest, but is just like these primates who depend on the trees to survive. This means that Lorax is another member of the wildlife community. The truth is that this diary cannot be confirmed as authentic, but all the stories, as well as the names and events, align very well with the story of the Lorax, as well as the name of the Once-ler, the main villain. All this material was definitely the main inspiration for Dr. Seuss to create this story. And most impressive of all, the Lorax. It's the meaning of a message he left before leaving, which only a few were able to decipher. He left a few rocks with the text, unless... Do you know what the Lorax was trying to tell us? I'll give you some time to figure it out before I give you the real explanation. In the meantime, let's see why Dr. Seuss created the Lorax in the first place. Something that many people didn't know is that big companies really hated Dr. Seuss. And after this book was published, the companies did everything they could to get the book removed. And did you know that Dr. Seuss used this nickname for his own safety? In his works, he often criticized companies that only wanted more and more money, and these companies hated him very much. That's why Theodore Geisel decided to go with the name Dr. Seuss, protecting himself from anything bad that could happen to him. The hatred from these companies was so great that they created a very disturbing version of Lorax called Truax, which actually has a very curious name. The meaning behind Truax explains what the intention of this dark character was. And with the more than 600 million copies that Lorax sold, people got a bad idea about these companies. Those who worked in logging trees for building houses and floors were discriminated against for quite some time. That was the main reason why they wanted to remove Lorax from all bookstores and schools for children. Truax comes from true or truth, while ax comes from Lorax, something like the truth of Lorax. They wanted to give their point of view regarding tree cutting, saying that it is necessary. And otherwise, there would be more pollution from using oil and worse chemicals for the environment. In the end, this strange idea didn't matter. The message of Lorax could be carried on for several years after. The villain was eliminated. The Once-ler was left completely alone in his abandoned factory. There were no trees left, nor any living animals. The Lorax simply ascended into the blue sky, where we will always be able to see him. And the last truffula seed was given to the only pure soul that the Lorax ever knew, Teth. This boy will now have to plant this seed and take care of it. The Once-ler finally understands the last message that the Lorax left. This message was left on a pile of stones which says, "Unless what?" The Once-ler understands that this message means that unless someone cares a whole lot, nothing is going to get better. So, the Once-ler shows his remorse and realizes that those who truly want something good will succeed. He sees this in the little one, who kept the Trufula seed, just as we also saw it in the story of the Lorax against the bad story of the Truax. The little one possibly will gradually create over the years a new Trufula forest around the rocks left by the Lorax. Rocks on which he possibly left his diary with a very inspiring story which would change the world.